I spent over a decade making games, working through crunch, the flame wars on the forums, the technical issues, and one thing I can tell you off the bat that the question everyone is asking about GTA 6's frame rate is the wrong one. I see lots of chatter on Reddit, even on YouTube, or other streamers' videos that look like this. Yo! GTA 6 gonna be 60 FPS? Is 60 FPS actually confirmed, mister? If it's not 60 FPS, I'm not buying it. And look, I get the frustration. I genuinely do. You've been waiting for this game for over a decade. You've been burned by all these hype cycles before in other games. So you're looking for the straight answer from someone that can give you a rational take on the matter. You're not looking for another hot take or another leaker recap or some random guy reading Reddit posts to you. So here's the whole shebang in regards to the whole GTA 6 FPS quandary. You're asking the wrong question. You know that old show Dragnet? Okay, if you're Gen Z, this might slide right by you. I'm really sorry, but I'm an old dude, so this makes sense to me. So Sergeant Friday had one line he was famous for. Just the facts, ma'am. And that's this video. It's just the facts. Because right now, the GTA 6 frame rate brouhaha is anything but facts. There's leakers contradicting each other, boilerplate copy being distributed to retailers, being mistaken for insider intel, and no one is sitting down and looking at the actual engineering underneath any of it. By the end of this video, the question won't be, will GTA 6 hit 60 FPS? It'll be, do I actually understand why hitting 60 FPS with this type of game is really super hard? And once you see it through this developer's old and grizzled eyes, the whole conversation gets a little clearer. So, just a quick note on whose old and grizzled eyes are on this mug who's plastered on your screen. I spent 14 years in the game industry on the production side at Epic Games, Bosky Productions, and Day One Studios. I was in these conference rooms where engineers and artists were at knife point over the trade-offs they would have to make with their games. It was exciting, but let me tell you. What are the trade-offs? Smoother gameplay versus better-looking graphics. How much is happening in the game at once and whether the CPU can keep up. I didn't write the engine code, but I worked with the technical directors that managed the people who did. And I sat through many of these arguments. I know exactly what's happening here. So one thing, this channel doesn't pretend to know things it can't know. So I'm going to be straight with you about what's confirmed, what's just an educated guess, and what's just people going bonkers and screaming at the walls just because they want to watch the world burn. Let's get down to work. Here's the part that's going to change this entire argument for you because the questions everyone's fighting about online isn't even fighting about the right things. So here's the 60 FPS conversation and how it usually goes. Someone posts in the forum, leaker says GTA 6 is confirmed 60 FPS on PS5 Pro. Reddit goes crazy, X/Twitter goes bonkers, YouTube flame wars explode. 17 reaction videos go up in 4 hours. Everyone's either celebrating or calling it a fake. And then massive amounts of silence. Because Rockstar doesn't confirm anything. Because Rockstar never says anything. And this hype cycle just keeps spinning out of control. But here's what nobody stops to ask. Why is 60 FPS hard for this specific game? Because it's not hard to do for every game. Your indie platformer like Pizza Tower, 60 FPS, no problem. That corridor shooter like Fear for the Xbox 360 that I worked on, 60 FPS was easy after backwards compatibility. So why is GTA 6 different? So GTA 6 is not a linear corridor shooter. It's not a small, predictable environment. It's a massive world simulation. GTA 6 isn't just a game that renders pretty pictures. It's a game that is computing an entire living city and surrounding environment in every single frame. You've got traffic going up and down the streets, pedestrians have behaviors and reactions, vehicles have physics, weather systems affect the environment, water has to move and respond, police systems have to track the player, and NPCs have to react to events happening around them, especially when you walk up to them and just punch them in the face or ram them with a car or anything of that sort happening. The world has to be loading and keeping in memory as you move through it. You're on your own on foot, or by you're speeding through in a car or a boat, or even now with aircraft. And all of that runs on the CPU, not the GPU, the CPU. And that distinction is where most of these online crackpots of conversations fall apart. Everyone talks about as though every part of the console does the same job and pulls the same weight. It doesn't. And here's the part that's going to make you super mad. Because that bright and shiny PS5 Pro you bought specifically for playing GTA 6, it doesn't actually solve the problem. Let me show you why. Nobody in these arguments is explaining this part clearly. And once you see this in a clear light, and the light bulb goes off in your head, you'll never look at the PS5 Pro marketing campaign in the same way again. So let me break this down without a whole bunch of terms that only a rocket scientist can understand. Since we're all nerds, I can't think of a better way to present this than to think of your console as the bridge of the Starship Enterprise. Yes, I know there's a conflict between Star Wars and Star Trek. I get it. My wife is a Trekkie. I like Star Wars. So let's do some role-playing on this bridge. The GPU is Sulu. He's fast, precise, and he handles the eye candy. These are the terms that the graphic geeks are super giddy about. Rendering pixels, ray tracing reflections, and upscaling resolution. The PS5 Pro has a massively upgraded Sulu. He has more graphics horsepower, he has better ray tracing performance, and he has PSSR upscaling. So let's stop for a brief moment and do a quick definition of what PSSR upscaling is for the non-techie people who usually just nod along silently in the back of the room. So PSSR uses AI to take a lower resolution image and rebuild it so it looks sharper and closer to 4K without making the PS5 render every pixel. That's it for our geek break, and let's go back to the Enterprise bridge, which is still pretty geeky, but not as geeky. So what Sulu has become, again, is an absolute monster for graphics. Now, in the command chair on the bridge, we have the CPU, who is actually Captain Kirk. He's the big dog coordinating what happens on the entire ship, who does what, when, and how, and what red shirt is going on an ill-fated sortie, and how the entire mission actually progresses. And here's the crazy part, the PS5 Pro basically has the same Captain Kirk as the base PS5. It's the same AMD Zen 2 architecture. It's got a fractional bump in clock speed, so Kirk got a slightly nicer command chair to yell at people from. That's it. So, Digital Foundry. And if you're not watching Digital Foundry on YouTube, go check them out right now. Their deputy editor, Will Judd, said, and I'm quoting directly here, 60 FPS feels like a bridge too far. Is this the bridge over the River Kwai? Is 60 frames per second that sort of analogy? Does anybody know what movie that is? I guess I'm too old. Hopefully people get that one. And his reasoning wasn't just something he pulled out of thin air. So here's what's baked into all of what he's thinking. And I'll quote him directly here. The PS5 Pro only offers a fractional CPU performance bump over base PS5, with most of its advantage deriving from a better GPU horsepower, improved real-time acceleration, and support for PSSR upscaling. None of these features actually shift the needle in terms of alleviating the CPU burden. Whoa, wait a minute, hold on. Let's go back to that quote and pull out the most important part, because that was a lot of words and some of them probably kind of missed the mark and we need to go take a look at them. The most important part is none of these features shift the needle on the CPU. So when those forum bros say, yo, PS5 Pro is so powerful, it'll definitely hit 60 FPS, man. What they're talking about is Sulu. But the problem is, in GTA 6, is that Kirk is already maxed out running all the different parts of the game. So now, let me give you a couple of real-world comparisons so this actually hits home. Let's take a game like Dragon's Dogma 2. It has a dense city, it has lots of NPCs, and it's CPU heavy. That game struggled to hold 30 FPS in the more populated areas on the current gen hardware. Baldur's Gate 3 had the same problem in dense locations. Even with those two examples, Digital Foundry said that GTA 6's world looks like another level of magnitude more challenging than either of those games. We're just looking for trouble here. And you can go anywhere you want in GTA 6 by car, boat, plane, maybe at 100 miles an hour, which means the world has to simulate and stream faster than any RPG ever had to. That's not a GPU problem. That's a CPU problem. And no amount of PSSR upskilling fixes that problem. But the hardware is only half the story. Rockstar's own track record tells you about the other half, and honestly, it's not going to be what you want to hear. But I'm going to tell it to you anyway. You want proof that isn't just theory? Rockstar already told you exactly what they're going to do. You just weren't paying attention. Now pay attention. So here's something that nobody talks about. Red Dead Redemption 2 came out in 2018. It is now 2026. That game has never been patched to at 60 FPS on any console. It's been 8 years since it was released on PS5 and on Series X. It's still running at 30 frames per second even after backwards compatibility. So hold that thought and let's look at a few of the Rockstar games. So GTA 4 came out at 30 FPS on console. GTA 5 came out at 30 FPS on console at launch. Red Dead Redemption 2, 30 FPS on console at launch. And it's still 30 FPS 8 years later. So going back and just coming down to earth with all of this, you know what this reminds me of? Inspector Gadget. In every episode, Gadget shows up with this incredible hardware. All the gadgets, the coat, the helicopter hat, and somehow still can't close the case without Penny doing all the actual work in the background. Where am I going with this analogy, or are you just saying you're insane, dude? So PS5 Pro is Inspector Gadget. He has all the hardware in the world available to him. But what if Penny, who is the CPU, isn't actually there to run the mission? You don't get any go-go gadget. You get Zippo. Let's go and look at something that's one of these Rockstar guys said. Obervirmi was a former technical lead at Rockstar, and he worked on GTA 3 through GTA 4. He said pretty clearly, it's a trade-off. At 30 FPS, you can render twice as many polygons compared to 60 FPS. For GTA, you actually might prefer the visual details. That's not some random internet dude. That's the guy who built the technical foundation of this franchise, telling you exactly how Rockstar thinks about the trade-off. Now, I know I'm going to get trolled because I didn't mention this above. GTA 5 did eventually get a 60 FPS mode on PS5 and Series X in March of 2022. And that's why I said at launch, suckers. But that was almost 9 years after the original release. So yeah, Rockstar can do 60 frames per second. They've proven it. But this is the thing. They do it after launch on a remaster when the game's demands are already known and it's been fully optimized. If GTA 6 were targeting 60 FPS from day one, Digital Foundry brought this up in an excellent point. And I'm going to quote them again here. The entire game and its simulation logic would have been targeting and budgeting for 60 FPS right from the very beginning. And the trailers were captured on a base PS5 and presented at 30 FPS. So, if this breakdown is giving you something the other GTA 6 channels aren't, smash that like button because it helps more people find this channel. Now, let's get to the leakers. These are people claiming that they have inside information. And this is where we need to look at both of their claims. Two leakers were talking about 60 frames per second, and their claims completely contradicted each other. The problem is that everyone online is picking a side without noticing the contradiction. So here's what's actually going on. There are two main sources driving the 60 FPS hype train right now. One leaker, Detective Seeds, posted in July 2025 claiming that GTA 6 was hitting 60 FPS on the PS5 Pro during optimization with PlayStation engineers embedded at Rockstar tied to a Sony marketing deal. Okay, just to let you know, having console engineers from Sony or Microsoft embedded at a company for big releases is not unusual. We had them at Epic during releases of Unreal Engine and during Gears of War. So Detective Seeds has a self-reported accuracy rate of around 91%. Not sure if self-reporting is something everyone does or believes, but he did correctly call the Oblivion remaster and the Doom Dark Ages. But he also missed on some other things. He doubled down on the 60 FPS claim in July 2026, but there was zero Rockstar confirmation. So, let's go to the other leaker. Boris Netpalak, I butchered that name, is the co-host of the Polish podcast Rock Eye Boris. In June of 2026, he said a single unknown, great, Rockstar source claimed there were two modes, 30 FPS and 60 FPS on the PS5 and on the Xbox Series X. Unfortunately, the Series S stays at 30 FPS. Sad face for you guys. He said that 60 FPS mode might not even be ready at launch. He has a decent track record with CD Projekt Red leaks, but he has no prior history with Rockstar. So here's what should be throwing up some massive red cards for everyone. These two leaks directly contradict each other. One says the PS5 Pro gets exclusive 60 FPS. The other says the PS5 and the Xbox Series X both get it. This reminds me is like we're looking at a bad episode of The X-Files where Mulder and Scully are looking at the exact same evidence and coming down to completely opposite conclusions. Mulder wants to believe it's 60 FPS since aliens dropped him the info, and Scully's looking at the CPU architecture and saying, Mulder, I need more than this. Me personally, I'm with Scully on this one. Alright, so let's move on to Twitter X, where someone posted the retailer listings, which I think were actually quickly yanked. These were taken from Media Market Poland and Amazon Brazil, which mentioned performance and quality modes. Well, this sounds pretty damn exciting, right? Oh, let's go take a look. Oh, great. Digital Foundry poured cold water on it immediately and said that it was boilerplate copy. They said most PS5 titles have those modes, so any AI-generated product description is going to include that language. It means nothing without actual frame rate numbers attached. Okay, so that whole rundown was quite a lot. We have two named leakers with sketchy track records. They both have conflicting claims. There is a zero Rockstar input and retailer copy that could have been written by a chatbot. It doesn't prove anything. It's just more speculation. So if 60 FPS is unlikely and the leaks are shaky, what is actually going to be shipped? Well, the answer I'm thinking about may surprise you because it's not 30 FPS and it's not 60 FPS. It's the third number in this conversation that almost nobody is talking about, and it actually might be a really doable number. So what I'm talking about is 40 FPS. You heard me correctly, 40. Not 60, not 30, 40. Here's why this number matters, and it's the most realistic, hey man, it's better than 30 scenario for GTA 6, especially on the PS5 Pro. 40 frames per second works cleanly on a 120 Hz display. God, I hate to do math on camera, but unfortunately, this math is pretty easy. 120 divided by 40 equals 3, so it's totally clean. Every frame gets exactly 25 milliseconds on screen. Now think in terms of how smooth this actually feels. At 30 frames per second, each frame sits on screen for 33.3 milliseconds. At 60 frames per second, it's 16.7 milliseconds. At 40 frames per second, you're at 25 milliseconds, and you're exactly between the two. All right, that's a lot of math. It's a lot of decimal places. But the main difference is the human eye makes the jump from 33.3 milliseconds to 25 milliseconds feels way more significant than the number suggests. And to quote Digital Foundry's Richard Ledbetter, called it far more of a win perceptually than the frame rate figure suggests. So how do we look at this in the common man's principle? Think of it like the Goldilocks story. 30 FPS is way too slow for what people want. 60 FPS is way too demanding for the CPU to handle this simulation load. But 40 FPS, that one's just right. Goldilocks likes that one. At least it's what this hardware can realistically deliver while keeping the full game intact. And there are already games that have proven that this works. Take Ratchet & Clank: A Rift Apart, Horizon Forbidden West, God of War Ragnarok, or The Last of Us Part 1. And of course, here is something that everybody probably knows, Starfield. And this is one of the most important comparisons to GTA 6. It's a CPU-bound open world game and it launched at 30 frames per second. It eventually got a 40 frames per second option added post-launch, but if you look at some of these videos, it still wheezes in dense cities even at 40 frames per second. Does that sound familiar? It's a CPU-heavy open world game. 30 FPS at launch. 40 FPS was included later. And it maps almost perfectly onto what GTA 6 is dealing with. So let's wrap this video up because I imagine that people have things to do and it's summertime. This is the question I want more players to consider. When you demand 60 FPS, what are you willing to give up? What are you willing to sacrifice? Are you willing to live with smaller crowds, less complex traffic, reduced physics, simpler police behavior, fewer environmental interactions, less detailed animations, a lower world density, or a less reactive city? Because performance is not free. Developers do not pull for extra frames out of thin air, and every frame is fought with a compromise. Sometimes the compromise is resolution, and sometimes it's lighting. Maybe it's visual detail, and sometimes it's the complexity of the game itself. Rockstar is building a world that doesn't merely look alive, it behaves like it's alive. And that ambition has a cost, and your cost may be frame rate. So you're allowed to decide that 30 FPS is unacceptable. That's your personal purchasing decision, that's all you. But we should at least be honest about the trade-off. Rockstar did not necessarily forget to add 60 frames per second. They may have chosen to spend that budget somewhere else. Could GTA 6 launch with a 60 FPS mode? Yeah. Well, people have asked me to give them a prediction. I'd say maybe 25% chance. Anyone telling you is impossible should know that nothing is impossible nowadays. Developers find clever solutions all the time. Optimization passes continue often late into a production timeline, and Rockstar has enormous technical resources. There may be details about the engine, console versions, or even final performance targets that we, the unsuspecting public, doesn't know. I would be happy to be wrong, but I'm not going to pretend that my guess is a confirmation. But three things would change if I think that this is a higher possibility of shipping with 60 FPS. One thing would be an official Rockstar statement naming the target frame rates. Another thing would be verified gameplay footage that can be technically analyzed, or gameplay footage at all at this point, or a public statement from Take-Two or Rockstar, like a press release or something of that sort, detailing the available performance modes. Until that happens, 60 FPS at launch remains unconfirmed. Based on the hardware, the game's open world complexity, and Rockstar's development history, I would not treat it as the most likely outcome. So here's what I believe is the realistic outcome. It's going to be a polished and stable 30 FPS mode that is focused on being visually awesome to provide everyone that open world experience that they've been craving. And potentially a 40 FPS mode for players on 120 Hz displays, particularly the ones that are on PS5 Pro. And eventually a 60 FPS version through like a PC release, a later console update, a more powerful hardware release, or some future enhanced version that everyone complains about and then buys anyway. You know how this works. I've purchased GTA 5 more times than I would like to admit, and I think I've purchased it 3 times. The truth is that GTA 6 does not need 60 FPS to become one of the biggest entertainment launches in history. And Rockstar knows that. Take-Two knows that. And deep down, most players know it also. The real test will not be whether the number in the corner on a test bed says 30 or 60. The real test is whether the game feels stable, it feels responsive, has a great story, is engaging to the players, and is technically awesome in every respect. A locked 30 FPS is better than a performance mode that constantly swings between 40 FPS and 60 FPS. It will drive you nuts. A well-paced 40 FPS can feel dramatically better than an unstable 60 FPS target. And that number matters. But consistency with this game matters more. So here's the question I want you to answer in the comments. If GTA 6 launches with a locked 30 FPS mode and a 40 FPS option for 120 Hz displays, is that enough for you to buy it on day one? Or are you genuinely waiting for 60 FPS? Leave your answer in the comments. I probably know where some of you stand because you mentioned it. So if this video gave you something that most GTA 6 channels aren't giving you, please subscribe. That's what this channel is all about. The engineering beneath the hype, and not more hype disguised as analysis. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.